A waitress answered a call in Russian in front of a millionaire next day. She boarded a private jet. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In a cozy corner of a bustling downtown cafe, Julia worked her usual shift as a waitress. She was a young woman, around 25 years old, with big dreams but little to show for them. The cafe, warm and filled with the hum of quiet conversation, was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Julia wore her uniform, a simple black apron over a white shirt, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She carried a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes, but it was enough to get her through each day. As she moved through the tables, delivering coffee, pastries, and checking in with customers, she couldn't help but dream of a life beyond the cafe. One day, maybe, she could leave this behind. But for now, she worked hard, kept her head down, and focused on the little things like the tip jar on the counter. Her world was about to shift in a way she couldn't possibly have imagined. It was a slow afternoon, with few customers, when a man walked in. He was tall, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly styled, and his presence commanded attention. Julia didn't recognize him, but there was something striking about him that made her glance over. He sat at a table by the window, absorbed in his phone, but he looked up as Julia approached to take his order. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something about the intensity of his gaze made her feel self-conscious. She quickly scribbled his order on her pad. As she was about to walk away, her phone rang. She pulled it from her apron pocket and saw an unknown number. Thinking it might be a family member, she answered without thinking, speaking in fluent Russian, a language she'd learned from her parents. She was in the middle of a brief exchange when she noticed the man watching her. She paused for a second, caught off guard by his intense gaze. Flustered, she quickly ended the call and apologized, but the man didn't say anything. Instead, he simply raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Julia felt a flutter of nerves. She couldn't understand why his attention made her feel so uneasy. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. As the evening wore on, the man remained seated by the window, his eyes never straying far from her. After she finished her shift, she gathered her things, ready to head home. Just as she was about to leave, the man stood up, walking over to her with a calm, deliberate step. He introduced himself as Robert Masters, a businessman, and said he had been intrigued by her. Julia was surprised when he invited her to meet with him again the next day. Confused but curious, she agreed, not knowing that this simple meeting would change her life forever. The next morning, Julia woke up to a world that felt oddly different. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind. Robert Masters, the man she had met at the cafe, was still fresh in her thoughts. He was a businessman, someone who seemed to have everything: wealth, power, confidence. Yet, his calm demeanor and the way he had looked at her made her feel like something had shifted inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but she had a sense that this meeting would be something more than just another casual encounter. She had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shake off the feeling that this man might be more than just a passing stranger in her life. Julia knew her life had always been a routine: work, home, sleep. She dreamed of a better life, but never imagined that it could happen for someone like her. Now, here she was, thinking about meeting someone like Robert again. It was a feeling she couldn't quite explain. She glanced at the clock on her bedside table. It was still early, but she had to get ready. She didn't want to be late. After a quick breakfast, Julia dressed in the best clothes she could afford. A simple blouse and jeans, nothing extravagant, but it was all she had. She looked at herself in the mirror and hesitated. She had never felt out of place at the cafe, but today felt different. She wasn't sure what kind of meeting this would be, but she was starting to sense that this wasn't just about a casual lunch. Robert had asked her to meet at a high-end restaurant in the city. It was a place she had only heard about in passing, a restaurant where only the wealthiest of people dined. As Julia stepped into the restaurant, her breath caught in her throat. The elegant decor, the fine art hanging on the walls, the soft glow of the chandeliers. It was nothing like the cozy cafe where she worked. She felt like she didn't belong here. The host led her to a table where Robert was already seated. He was wearing an impeccable suit, looking as composed as ever, his eyes meeting hers with an almost knowing smile. "You made it," he said, standing up to greet her. "Of course," Julia replied, feeling a little out of place. "Thank you for inviting me." Robert gestured to the seat across from him, and Julia sat down. The waiter quickly brought them menus, but Robert didn't seem to be interested in ordering yet. Instead, he leaned in slightly and said, "I've been thinking about our conversation from last night." Julia blinked, surprised. "You have?" "Yes," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I find you intriguing, Julia. There's something about you. You're different from the others I meet." Julia didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't used to being complimented like this, especially not by someone who seemed so far out of her league. "I don't know what you mean," she said softly, looking down at her hands. Robert smiled, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're real. Not like the others. Most people just care about what they can get from me. But you're genuine. I respect that." Julia felt her cheeks flush at his words. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. They sat in silence for a moment before Robert continued. "I want to offer you something. A chance to change your life, if you're willing to take it." Julia looked up at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "I've been watching you, Julia. You're smart, hard-working, and you deserve more than this." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "I can offer you a new opportunity, a job, something that could change everything for you." Julia felt a wave of confusion wash over her. "I'm not sure I understand," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm offering you a position in my company," Robert said, his tone calm but firm. "It's not just any job. It's a position where you can grow, learn, and really make a difference. I think you're the kind of person who can do something amazing with this opportunity." Julia sat back in her chair, stunned. She had never imagined anything like this. A job with Robert Masters? A chance to escape the life she had been living? She didn't know if she was ready for such a big change. But at the same time, something inside her told her this might be her only chance to get out. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Robert seemed to sense her hesitation. "Take some time to think about it, Julia," he said softly. "But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Julia nodded, still processing what he had said. She had always dreamed of a different life, but this was more than she could have ever imagined. As she left the restaurant that afternoon, the weight of Robert's offer hung heavily in her mind. Could she really change her life? Was she ready to take that leap? She wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change forever. The days following her meeting with Robert were a whirlwind for Julia. The offer he had made kept replaying in her mind, and as she walked through the busy streets of the city on her way to work, she couldn't help but wonder if this was a chance she could not pass up. Her usual routine at the cafe had started to feel even more draining than before. The long hours, the low wages, the constant strain. It all felt so small compared to what Robert was offering. But the more she thought about it, the more she questioned herself. Was she really ready for this new life? Could she handle such a dramatic shift from the world she knew? Julia spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, the weight of Robert's offer pressing down on her. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that the thought of thriving in a world so different from her own seemed almost impossible. She didn't have the skills, the education, or the experience to step into a high-powered business role, or so she thought. The next day, she arrived at the cafe with a heaviness in her chest, knowing that her decision was coming soon. As she served coffee and cleared tables, she tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to Robert's words. "You deserve more than this." For the first time in a long time, Julia began to believe him. Maybe she could have more. Maybe she could be more. She finished her shift and sat in the small break room, staring at her phone. There was a message from Robert, just a simple reminder, "Don't wait too long." That was it. Something inside, Julia snapped. She had been waiting for the right moment, waiting for the courage to act, But now, she realized that the right moment might never come unless she made it happen herself. She couldn't keep living like this. The next morning, she stood in front of her mirror again, a nervous excitement bubbling inside her. She pulled on a simple dress, one that she had bought on sale, and tried to look her best. It wasn't much, but she didn't need a lot to feel ready. She was ready to take this leap. As she walked into Robert's office later that day, she could hardly believe she was there. The office building was sleek and modern, a far cry from the cafe where she spent her days. The security guard nodded at her as she entered, and she took the elevator to the top floor, her heart pounding in her chest. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a receptionist who smiled warmly and led her to Robert's office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression softened. "Julia," he said, his voice warm. "I'm glad you came." She smiled nervously, taking a seat across from him. "I've thought about what you said," she began, "and I'm ready to take the chance. I want to accept your offer." Robert's eyes brightened, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I'm glad to hear that. This isn't just about the job, Julia. It's about changing your life, and I believe you have what it takes to succeed." Julia took a deep breath, feeling a surge of confidence. "I know I don't have the experience, but I'm willing to work hard and learn." Robert smiled, nodding approvingly. "That's all I ask. The rest will follow." As she left his office, Julia felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had taken the first step toward a new life, and though she wasn't sure exactly what the future would hold, she knew it would be different from anything she had ever imagined. The cafe, the long hours, the constant struggle, they all seemed so far away now. She was on the verge of something big, and for the first time in her life, Julia felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Julia's first day at Robert's company was nothing short of overwhelming. She had stepped into a world so different from the cafe, and as she walked through the sleek, modern hallways, it felt as if she was in a dream. The building was enormous, the polished floors reflecting the high-end decor, and the air felt heavy with ambition. She had never been in an office like this, never imagined herself working in such a professional, high-powered environment. But today, it was her reality. As she sat down at her new desk, her mind raced with excitement and nervousness. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down to see a message from Robert. "Welcome aboard. You're going to do great." She smiled to herself, the weight of the words sinking in. This was it. This was the beginning of something new. Julia took a deep breath and got to work. She spent her first few hours familiarizing herself with her tasks. The learning curve was steep. She had always been good with people, but business was a whole new world to her. She needed to absorb everything quickly, and she did her best to keep up with the fast pace. Her colleagues were kind but distant, and she couldn't help but feel out of place. They were all so polished, so confident, and here she was, just trying to get the hang of things. The day passed quickly, and by the end of her shift, Julia felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had made progress, but it was clear that she had much to learn. As she was packing up to leave, Robert stopped by her desk. He gave her an encouraging smile. "How was your first day?" he asked. "It was challenging," Julia admitted, "but I'm excited to keep learning." "That's the spirit," Robert said with a smile. "You're doing well. Don't be too hard on yourself. Everyone starts somewhere." Julia appreciated his encouragement. It was easy to feel like she didn't belong here, but Robert's words helped ease her anxiety. As she walked out of the building and into the cool evening air, she felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Over the next few weeks, Julia settled into her new role. She worked late into the evenings, poring over documents, attending meetings, and learning the ropes. It was hard, and at times she felt like giving up, but she pushed through. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to quit now. Robert continued to offer her support and guidance, checking in with her regularly. His presence, though calm and authoritative, made her feel more at ease. He didn't treat her like the new girl who didn't know anything. Instead, he treated her like someone with potential, someone who could grow and succeed. Julia found herself starting to look forward to work each day. She wasn't just showing up for a paycheck anymore. She was showing up for the opportunity to build something bigger, for the chance to prove to herself that she could do it. But as time went on, Julia began to notice something about Robert. There was a layer to him that he kept hidden, something that made him seem more distant than he let on. He was kind, but there was a certain sadness in his eyes, a weight he carried that he never spoke about. Julia couldn't help but feel drawn to him, not just because of his wealth and power, but because of the vulnerability he seemed to keep hidden beneath the surface. It wasn't something she could explain, but it made her want to help, to understand him better. One evening, as they were working late together, Julia finally gathered the courage to ask, "Robert, is everything okay?" He paused, looking at her with a guarded expression. For a moment, she thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've just been busy," he said, but Julia could tell it wasn't the whole truth. There was something more, something he wasn't ready to share. Julia didn't press, but she couldn't help but wonder what it was. As she left the office that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Robert's story, and that maybe, just maybe, their lives were intertwined in ways neither of them fully understood yet. As the days went by, Julia found herself more immersed in her work. The initial challenges of her new role at Robert's company began to feel more manageable, but the uncertainty she had been carrying with her still lingered. Robert had given her a chance to prove herself, and she was determined not to let him down. Yet, the feeling of being out of her depth still haunted her. She worked tirelessly, staying late, sometimes well into the evening, just to make sure she wasn't falling behind. It wasn't just about learning the tasks at hand, though. Julia was also learning about herself. She was beginning to understand what it meant to push her limits and grow beyond the world she had always known. She found herself developing new skills and confidence she never thought she had. She started participating in meetings, offering her insights, and becoming a more active part of the team. The once overwhelming and foreign world of business was slowly becoming something familiar, something she could thrive in. But through all the progress, something was changing within Julia. She couldn't ignore the growing feelings she had for Robert. It was something that developed slowly, quietly, as they spent more time together. Robert's kindness, his attention to detail, and the subtle way he cared about her work had sparked something in her that she couldn't easily dismiss. At the same time, she was increasingly aware of his distance. He was supportive, yes, but there was something elusive about him. The moments they shared at work were meaningful, but she never felt like she truly knew him, and that began to bother her. It was a Wednesday evening when it all came to a head. Julia had been working late again, as usual, when Robert called her into his office. She walked in, expecting just another quick check-in about her progress, but what she found surprised her. Robert was sitting at his desk, his face more somber than she had ever seen. The usual confident, composed businessman seemed to be gone. "Julia, I need to talk to you," Robert said, his voice steady but heavy. Julia's heart skipped a beat, sensing something was off. She took a seat across from him, waiting for him to continue. "I've been keeping something from you," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "And I think it's time I told you." Julia sat still, her mind racing. Was he going to tell her something personal? Was he in trouble? "It's not easy for me to say this," Robert continued, his gaze softening. "But I've been going through some personal issues. It's been affecting me more than I've let on, and it's starting to impact the way I interact with you." Julia listened carefully, trying to process the sudden shift in the conversation. Robert had always been a mystery to her, but now she felt like she was finally getting a glimpse behind the curtain. "I've been dealing with family problems," Robert explained, his voice quiet. "There's a lot of pressure on me right now, and I've been carrying it alone. I didn't want to bring it into the workplace, but I realize now that it's affecting my judgment." Julia was taken aback. She had always seen Robert as someone with everything under control, someone who never seemed to waver. The idea that he was struggling with something so personal was both surprising and humbling. She wanted to reach out to him, but she wasn't sure how. "You don't have to carry it alone, you know," she said softly, her voice sincere. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." Robert looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. Appreciation, maybe even relief. "Thank you, Julia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't say it enough, but I appreciate you more than you know." The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken words. Julia didn't know what to say next, so she simply nodded, It was then that she realized something important. Her feelings for Robert were not just about attraction, they were about connection. In that moment, they shared something real, something human. For the first time since she had started at the company, Julia felt like she truly understood Robert, not just as a boss, but as a person. As she left his office that night, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had always been focused on what she could gain from this opportunity, but now she was starting to see it in a different light. This wasn't just about her career. It was about building something meaningful, whether it was with Robert or with herself. Julia didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer afraid of what it might bring. Julia had always thought of Robert as someone who was untouchable, someone who had everything figured out. But the conversation they had shared the previous evening had shattered that image. She had seen the vulnerability in him, something she hadn't expected to find beneath the cool, professional exterior he had always presented. As the days passed, Julia couldn't help but reflect on that moment. She found herself thinking about Robert more than she should. It was no longer just about the job, no longer just about her new life at the company. There was something deeper at play. She was starting to care for him, and she couldn't deny it. At the same time, she didn't know what to do with these feelings. Robert had his own struggles, his own burdens to bear, and she couldn't be sure if he was even aware of the way she was starting to feel. She didn't want to make things complicated at work. It had taken her so long to find her footing in this new world, and she wasn't sure she was ready to risk it all. Yet, every time she saw him, that uncertainty grew. It was impossible to ignore the connection between them. She knew he appreciated her, and there were moments when she felt something more in his gaze, something that made her heart race. But there was a wall, a barrier, and Julia wasn't sure if it was something she could break through. One late afternoon, as Julia was finishing up a project, Robert walked into the office, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a visible tension. He was on the phone, speaking urgently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he saw Julia, he gave her a small, reassuring smile before excusing himself from the call. "Julia, can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his tone more serious than usual. Julia nodded, setting her pen down, her stomach flipping with nervous anticipation. As he sat down across from her, he looked at her with a mixture of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "I wanted to thank you again for your support the other night," he began. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. It means more to me than I let on." Julia felt a warmth in her chest at his words. "Of course," she said softly. "I meant it. You don't have to carry everything on your own." Robert's expression softened. "I know, and I appreciate you more than you know." There was a long pause, and Julia couldn't help but feel a surge of something hope, maybe inside her. "I've been dealing with a lot lately, Julia," Robert continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know how to handle it all." She looked at him, sensing the weight he was carrying. "What's going on, Robert?" she asked gently. For the first time, Robert seemed to hesitate, unsure of how much to share. But he finally spoke, his voice steady, but tinged with emotion. "There's been trouble with the company. There are people trying to take over, and I've been fighting to keep everything from falling apart. It's been exhausting, and I haven't known who to turn to." Julia's heart ached for him. "I had no idea," she said quietly. Robert leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I've been trying to protect everything, my family, the company, my reputation, but I can't do it alone." Julia's mind was racing. She wanted to help him, to be there for him, the way he had been there for her. "You don't have to," she said, her voice firm. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself, Robert. We're in this together. I want to help." Robert looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he nodded. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said quietly. Julia's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him speak like that before. It was like the walls he had carefully built around himself were starting to crumble, and he was letting her in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, in the quiet, a shared understanding passing between them. Julia knew that things were changing. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but one thing was clear: she had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one where the lines between work, friendship, and something more were beginning to blur. As she left the office that evening, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She had taken the first step in her new life, but now she was standing on the edge of something even bigger, something that could change everything for both of them. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Julia. She had made the decision to step fully into this new chapter of her life, and every day brought new challenges and new opportunities. Robert's presence in her life had become even more constant, and as they worked side by side, the bond between them grew stronger. They spent long hours together, often late into the night, strategizing and solving problems. Julia could sense the weight of the decisions Robert had to make, and as he confided more in her, she became more determined to be there for him. One evening, as the office emptied out and the city lights twinkled in the distance, Robert invited Julia to join him for dinner. She accepted, knowing it wasn't just another work meeting but an opportunity to connect beyond the office. They walked to a nearby restaurant, and as they sat down at a quiet table by the window, Robert's demeanor softened. There was no rush to talk business, and for the first time in a long while, they were able to relax. "You've been an incredible help to me, Julia," Robert said, his voice sincere. "I don't think I've ever trusted someone so much in such a short time." Julia smiled, grateful for his words. "I'm just doing my job, Robert. But thank you for saying that." The dinner passed in a comfortable silence, the conversation flowing naturally between them. Julia felt the walls that had once existed between them beginning to fade. She no longer saw Robert as just her boss, but as someone she genuinely cared for. She had been surprised by how easily their conversations had shifted from work to personal matters. Robert had told her more about his background, his family, and the weight of the responsibilities he had taken on. She learned that his company wasn't just a business to him, it was a legacy, one that he had inherited but was struggling to keep afloat. Julia could see the pressure that came with it, and she admired his determination. As the evening wore on, Robert's mood shifted. His usual confident demeanor seemed to falter as he stared out the window. Julia noticed the change in him and couldn't help but ask, "What's going on, Robert? You're not your usual self tonight." He turned to her, his eyes tired. "There's been more trouble with the company," he admitted. "I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting this battle. I'm doing everything I can, but it feels like I'm losing control." Julia felt a pang of sympathy for him. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You don't have to face this alone. You've already been doing so much, Robert. Let me help you, even if it's just by being there for you." He looked at her, his expression softening. "You're one of the few people who really understands, Julia. I don't know how I would have made it this far without you." The sincerity in his voice made Julia's heart race. She hadn't realized how much she had grown to care for him, but now it was undeniable. As they left the restaurant and walked back to their cars, the night air felt crisp, but there was a warmth between them that hadn't been there before. Robert's hand brushed hers as they said goodbye. And for a moment, Julia felt something shift. She wasn't sure what it meant, but the connection between them was undeniable. The following day at work, Julia noticed a change in the dynamic between them. Robert seemed more relaxed, more open. He trusted her with more responsibilities, and the conversations they shared felt more personal. Julia had always admired his strength and resolve, but now she saw him in a new light. He wasn't just the powerful businessman she had thought he was. He was a person, someone who carried burdens and fears just like anyone else. That realization made her want to be there for him even more. As they worked late one evening, Robert turned to her with a serious expression. "Julia, I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been keeping my distance because I didn't want to complicate things, but I can't keep pretending." Julia felt her heart race as she waited for him to continue. "I've developed feelings for you, Julia," Robert admitted, his voice low and sincere. "And I don't know how to handle it, but I can't deny it anymore." Julia's mind raced. She hadn't expected him to say that, but now that the words were out there, everything felt clearer. She had felt it too. She had cared for him in ways she hadn't fully realized, and now she understood why everything had felt so complicated. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't just an employee, but a person in his life, someone he trusted, someone he valued. "I've developed feelings for you too, Robert," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I think we need to figure out what this means for both of us." Robert smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We will, Julia. We'll figure this out together." In that moment, Julia knew that everything was about to change again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next, whether it was with Robert or on her own. As the days went by, the connection between Julia and Robert deepened. They had admitted their feelings for each other, and though the path ahead seemed uncertain, they decided to take it one step at a time. The once professional, business-only relationship was slowly becoming something more personal. Yet, despite their growing closeness, they both knew that the challenges of their professional lives had not disappeared. Robert's company was still struggling, and the pressure on him was mounting. Julia had grown more involved in the daily operations, helping to manage the stress Robert was under. Every day, she witnessed the weight he carried. There were late-night meetings, constant calls, and business decisions that seemed to never stop. He was doing everything he could to hold it all together, but Julia could see the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as they worked late in Robert's office, he paused and looked out the window, his gaze distant. Julia could tell something was troubling him. "Robert?" she asked, her voice soft. He turned to her with a tired smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's just a lot," he said, rubbing his temples. "I feel like I'm losing control. I can't do this alone anymore, Julia, but I don't know how to fix it." Julia stood up and walked over to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," she said gently. "You've done everything you can, but it's okay to lean on others, even if it feels like you're losing control. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders." Robert looked at her, his expression softening. "I've always been the one people rely on. I don't know how to be the one who needs help." Julia smiled, squeezing his shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to let people in. I'm here for you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging between them. Julia could feel the unspoken bond growing stronger. Robert had been carrying this burden alone for so long, and now, for the first time, he was allowing someone to share it with him. It wasn't easy, but Julia knew this was the step they needed to take. As they continued to work late into the night, a new sense of understanding settled between them. Julia wasn't just there as a colleague anymore. She was there as someone who truly cared. The next day, Robert made a bold decision. He called an emergency meeting with his board members to discuss the future of the company. For the first time, he spoke openly about the challenges he had been facing, admitting that he needed help and support. Julia sat beside him, offering her quiet strength as he spoke. When the meeting was over, there was a sense of relief in the air. Robert's decision to open up had been a turning point not just for the company, but for him personally. He had taken the first step toward letting go of the burden of perfection and allowing himself to be vulnerable. Later that evening, as they walked out of the office together, Robert turned to Julia with a genuine smile. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, for believing in me." Julia smiled back. "You don't need to thank me. I'm here because I believe in you, Robert, and I believe in us." As they stepped into the night, their hearts felt lighter. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face it together. Robert had opened up about his struggles, and Julia had been there for him. In that moment, they both realized that together they could face anything. The connection between them had only grown stronger, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they were no longer alone. As the days passed, the tension within the company began to subside. Robert's decision to open up during the meeting had been a breakthrough, not just for the business, but for himself. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. Julia had become his rock, the one person he trusted completely. The connection they shared grew stronger every day. While Robert was still facing challenges, there was a new sense of clarity in how he approached them. The pressure was still there, but now he didn't feel like he was sinking under it. Julia's presence in his life had made all the difference. She had stood by him when he was at his lowest, and that support had allowed him to move forward with renewed strength. The company, though still facing tough times, began to stabilize. Robert had assembled a team of trusted advisors to help him navigate the crisis, and Julia had taken on an increasingly important role in managing key projects. She had proved herself to be more than just an assistant. She was integral to the company's success. As they worked together, Robert began to see Julia in a new light. She wasn't just the woman he had leaned on emotionally. She was someone with immense potential, someone who had the capability to lead. He had always admired her strength, but now he was starting to see the depth of her abilities. They spent long hours in the office, working side by side, but there was something different in the air between them. It wasn't just about work anymore. Their feelings for each other had grown, and it was becoming more difficult to ignore. Late one evening, after a particularly challenging day, Robert and Julia sat in his office, reviewing financial reports. The room was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the city below. They were both exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. Robert looked up from the papers and met Julia's eyes. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd be able to get through this, but having you by my side makes all the difference." Julia smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "You've done the hard work, Robert. I'm just here to help in whatever way I can." Robert leaned back in his chair, his gaze softening. "I don't think you realize just how much you've done for me," he said quietly. "You've not only helped me with the company, but you've helped me in ways I never expected. You've made me see things differently. I can't imagine doing this without you." The sincerity in his voice made Julia's heart race. She had always known she cared for him, but hearing him say these words made her realize just how deeply her feelings had grown. She stood up and walked over to his desk, her movements slow but deliberate. "Robert," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens." Robert looked up at her, his expression serious yet tender. "I know, Julia," he replied, "and I want you to know that I feel the same way." For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of their words sinking in. Neither of them knew what the future held, but in that moment, they knew that they were stronger together. Robert stood up and walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "I've never been good at letting people in," he admitted. "But you've changed that. You've made me realize that I don't have to face everything alone. I want to face the future with you by my side." Julia's heart fluttered, and she looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I want that too, Robert. I don't know what's ahead, but I'm ready to face it with you." As they stood there, their hands intertwined, a sense of peace washed over them. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but they knew they could face it together. Julia's place in Robert's life had transformed from that of a colleague to someone far more significant. As they left the office that night, hand in hand, they both knew that whatever the future held, they would no longer face it alone. Weeks passed, and the dynamic between Robert and Julia evolved. The pressure from the company's struggles had not fully dissipated, but Robert felt lighter, knowing he wasn't facing everything alone. Julia had become not only his confidant, but a partner in every sense of the word. They had become a team, working together through the challenges, making decisions side by side, and learning from each other every day. Their connection was undeniable, and as they spent more time together, their feelings for each other deepened. Yet, despite the growing bond, the complexities of their professional relationship remained. Robert still had a business to run, and Julia was his employee. The lines between personal and professional were beginning to blur, but neither of them was willing to address it head-on. Instead, they focused on the work at hand. Robert's decision to open up to Julia had made all the difference in the world, but it also made him more vulnerable. He couldn't deny that he was beginning to rely on her in ways he never had before. He had been used to carrying everything on his own, but Julia had shown him the power of shared strength. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about trust, about finding someone who could see him for who he really was, flaws, struggles, and all. But as their connection grew, so did the tension between them. Robert had always been a man of control, of power. He prided himself on his ability to manage every aspect of his life. And yet, in Julia, he found someone who made him question that control. He wanted to be with her, but he feared what it might mean for their professional lives. Julia, too, was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had been working at the company for several months now, and she had proven herself in ways she never thought possible. But her growing feelings for Robert made it difficult to navigate her professional responsibilities. She was no longer just his assistant. She had become a key player in the company's success. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder if her feelings for Robert might complicate things. One evening, as they sat in Robert's office, reviewing the latest financial reports, Julia couldn't ignore the tension that had been building between them. There was an unspoken understanding, a chemistry that neither of them could deny. Robert glanced at her, his gaze lingering just a little too long. "Julia," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "About us," he said quietly. Julia's breath caught in her throat. She had known this conversation was coming. She had been avoiding it, pretending that everything was fine, but deep down, she knew they couldn't continue to ignore it. "I think we need to set some boundaries," Robert said, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I can't keep pretending like everything's just business between us. There's something here, and we both know it." Julia swallowed hard. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't want to risk everything we've worked for. We've both come so far." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Neither do I," he said softly. "But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this way about you. You mean more to me than just a colleague, Julia." The words hung in the air between them. Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time, they were being honest with each other. But with that honesty came the weight of the decision they would need to make. Could they continue working together with these new feelings between them? Could their relationship evolve without jeopardizing everything they had worked so hard for? Julia stood up, walking over to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for a moment, she felt a sense of clarity. "I don't have the answers," she said, her back to Robert. "But I know that we can't keep pretending. We need to figure this out, together." Robert stood up as well, walking over to her. "I agree," he said, his voice sincere. "Whatever happens, I want to make this work. I'm not ready to lose you, Julia." Julia turned to face him, her heart racing. "I'm not ready to lose you either," she whispered. The air between them was charged, the tension palpable. But there was also a sense of relief. They had finally admitted the truth to each other, and now they could take the next step together. It wasn't going to be easy. They knew the road ahead would be complicated, but they were ready to face it. Together, Julia and Robert had finally faced the truth about their feelings for each other, and although the weight of their decision to be open with one another was heavy, it brought a sense of relief. Their honesty had created a new foundation between them, one that was built on mutual trust and respect. They knew that their relationship was complicated, but they were determined to figure it out together. The following weeks were a mixture of heightened emotions and focused work. Robert's company had stabilized, and Julia had proven herself as an indispensable part of the team. As they spent more time together, both professionally and personally, they learned how to balance the demands of their growing relationship with the responsibilities of the business. However, as their connection deepened, so did the complexity of their situation. They knew they couldn't keep their relationship a secret forever. Word around the office started to spread, and although the employees remained mostly silent about it, the atmosphere had changed. Julia and Robert tried to maintain a professional front, but it became increasingly difficult to ignore the glances and whispered conversations. There was a sense of unease, especially from some of the board members who had always viewed Robert as someone who kept his personal life strictly separate from business. One afternoon, Robert called a board meeting to address the company's future. Julia, as always, was by his side. But today, she felt the pressure of the room more than ever. She knew this meeting could change everything. As the board members gathered around the long conference table, Robert opened the meeting with a sense of resolve. "I want to address something that's been brewing in this company for some time," he began. "And I know some of you have been concerned. Julia and I have been working closely together, and I want to make it clear that this is not just about business. We've developed a personal relationship, and I believe it's important for the future of the company that I am honest with all of you about this." Julia could feel the tension rise in the room as Robert's words settled. Some of the board members exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Robert continued, "I know this may be difficult for some of you to accept, but I trust Julia's judgment, and she has proven time and time again that she has the skills and the heart to help this company succeed." Julia felt a wave of gratitude toward Robert for standing by her, but she couldn't ignore the unease in the room. "We're committed to keeping the company's best interests at the forefront," Robert added. "This decision isn't about us. It's about the future of the company and what's best for all of us." A moment of silence followed. Finally, one of the senior board members, a man named Charles, spoke up. "Robert, I respect your honesty, but we need to be sure that this personal relationship won't interfere with the company's operations. We've always relied on you to be the steady hand guiding us. Now, we need to be sure that your judgment is not clouded by personal feelings." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concerns, Charles, and I assure you, my priority is the company's success. Julia and I both know the importance of maintaining professionalism in the workplace. Our personal relationship will never interfere with our dedication to the company." The room was still tense, but there was a shift. The board members seemed to accept Robert's words, but it was clear that the path ahead would not be without challenges. The decision had been made. Robert and Julia's relationship was no longer just a secret shared between them. It was now something that had to be handled with care, not only in their personal lives, but in the professional realm as well. After the meeting, Robert and Julia walked back to his office, the weight of the discussion still hanging in the air. "Do you think they'll be okay with this?" Julia asked, her voice uncertain. Robert looked at her with a reassuring smile. "I think they'll come around. We've earned their respect. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to face it with you." Julia felt a sense of calm wash over her at his words. No matter what happened, they had each other. They had always been honest with one another, and that honesty would carry them through whatever came next. As they sat down in Robert's office, side by side, Julia realized that this was just another step in their journey. The future was still uncertain, but they had already faced the hardest part, being true to themselves and to each other. They had learned that love and business could coexist, as long as they remained grounded in trust and respect. They had built a foundation that, no matter the obstacles, would withstand whatever challenges the world threw their way. As the weeks passed, the balance between Julia and Robert's personal and professional lives became increasingly delicate. They had navigated the initial awkwardness of their relationship being out in the open, and the tension with the board had gradually settled. The company was moving forward, and their partnership seemed stronger than ever. However, Julia and Robert knew that this newfound openness came with its own set of challenges. One afternoon, Robert asked Julia to meet him in his office after hours. When she arrived, she found him sitting at his desk, looking thoughtful, as if something was weighing heavily on his mind. "Julia, I need to talk to you," Robert said, his voice more serious than usual. She took a seat across from him, her heart quickening as she noticed the tension in his posture. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to hide the concern in her voice. Robert looked at her with a mixture of determination and hesitation. "We've been doing well, but I'm starting to worry. There are still challenges ahead, and I don't want us to lose focus. I need you to be prepared, because I think the next few months are going to be the hardest yet." Julia nodded, her brow furrowing as she listened to him. She knew that the company's recovery wasn't going to be a straight path. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "We've come this far, and we'll make it through the rest. We've been through a lot already, and we can handle whatever comes next." Robert leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I need to know that you're ready for what's ahead. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about our future, and the future of this company. I can't do it without you, Julia." His words sent a wave of emotion through her. She knew how much the company meant to him, how much he had invested in it, not just in terms of money, but his heart and soul. She had always been there for him, offering her support and dedication, but now she could feel the weight of the responsibility in his words. "I'm ready," Julia said, her voice unwavering. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, I'll be right there with you." Robert's expression softened, and for a moment, he just looked at her, as if he were seeing her in a new light. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't know how much that means to me." They sat there for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Julia could see the vulnerability in Robert's eyes, the uncertainty that lingered beneath his calm exterior. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions. But now, she could see the cracks in his armor. He was human, just like everyone else. And that realization only made Julia more determined to stand by him. Over the next few weeks, the company faced more hurdles, unexpected financial setbacks, disagreements within the leadership team, and mounting pressure from competitors. But through it all, Julia and Robert worked together. their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They spent long nights brainstorming solutions, talking through the issues, and supporting each other when the weight of everything became too much. Julia had never imagined that her journey would lead her here, to this place where her personal and professional lives were so intricately intertwined. But as she worked alongside Robert, she realized that she was not just helping him with the company's recovery, she was also helping him heal, in more ways than one. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with the board, Julia and Robert found themselves alone in his office once again. Robert was sitting at his desk, looking tired but determined, while Julia stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Robert said, breaking the silence. Julia turned to him, her heart racing at the sincerity in his voice. "You don't have to worry about that," she replied softly. "We're in this together, Robert. You're not alone anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of their responsibilities felt a little lighter. They had made it through so much already, and as they looked toward the future, they knew there would be more obstacles to overcome. But they also knew they could face it all, together. Julia smiled and walked over to him, sitting down beside him at the desk. She reached out and took his hand, their fingers entwining. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we'll face it side by side." Robert looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude, and something more, a deep, quiet affection that he had never shown before. "Together," he agreed, his voice filled with a sense of certainty that Julia hadn't heard from him in a long time. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they both felt ready to face whatever came next. Together. The months that followed were a testament to the strength of Robert and Julia's partnership, both professionally and personally. The company continued to flourish, overcoming the obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Robert's leadership, paired with Julia's unwavering dedication, proved to be the perfect combination for success. The challenges they faced together only brought them closer, and the bond they shared became undeniable to everyone around them. They had built something remarkable, not just a thriving business, but a relationship founded on mutual respect, trust, and love. It was clear that their connection wasn't just about business. It was about two people who had found something real in each other, something worth fighting for. As the company expanded, so did their roles. Robert and Julia were no longer just boss and employee, they were partners in every sense of the word. Their relationship continued to grow stronger, and they became a force to be reckoned with in the business world. But beyond the success, it was the support they provided each other that mattered the most. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Robert and Julia sat together in his office, reflecting on how far they had come. The city lights outside were a beautiful contrast to the exhaustion they both felt, but there was also a sense of contentment. They had done it. They had faced the struggles, both personal and professional, and had emerged stronger on the other side. "I never imagined we would come this far," Julia said, a soft smile playing on her lips. "It feels like everything's fallen into place." Robert looked at her, his expression filled with admiration. "I couldn't have done it without you, Julia. You've been my rock through all of this. You've made me believe in myself again." Julia reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "And you've made me believe in us, in what we can do, together." Robert smiled and leaned in, his voice low and sincere. "I know we've both had our doubts along the way. But I don't doubt us. I don't doubt you." Julia's heart swelled at his words. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the life they had built together. They had taken the risks, faced the challenges, and now they had created something lasting. As the days passed, they continued to grow, both as individuals and as a couple. Their love was a constant, unwavering force in their lives, and it strengthened with each passing day. It wasn't just the business success that mattered to them. It was the shared moments, the quiet support, the understanding that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. 1 year later, they found themselves sitting together in a small, intimate restaurant, a celebration of their journey, of the road they had traveled together. Robert turned to Julia, his eyes full of warmth. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he asked, his voice filled with pride. Julia smiled, her heart full. "We really have," she replied, "and I wouldn't change a thing." As they raised their glasses to toast to their future, they both knew that this was just the beginning. They had faced the storms, weathered the challenges, and emerged stronger than ever. The future was theirs, to create. Together. And as they looked toward the horizon, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it with the same strength, love, and unwavering partnership that had gotten them this far. They had built something extraordinary, a life and a love that could withstand anything, together. In this captivating journey of success and personal growth, we dive deep into the world of millionaire stories. Where the power of trust, dedication, and love intertwines. This story follows the relationship between Julia and Robert, a dynamic duo who build not just a business empire but a lasting partnership. From the early challenges of balancing personal and professional lives to overcoming the immense pressures of running a successful company, Julia and Robert prove that love and ambition can thrive together. As their bond grows stronger, their shared journey reflects the essence of millionaire stories. Where the pursuit of success is matched by emotional resilience and support. They face numerous obstacles, but with every challenge, their connection deepens, showing that behind every successful business venture lies a story of trust, vulnerability, and hard work. Millionaire stories. Often highlight how success can transform lives. But Julia and Robert's journey shows that it's not just about the wealth, but the meaningful relationships that come along the way. In the end, their love for each other and their shared vision of success solidify their place in the world of millionaire stories. Proving that no matter how high you rise, it's the people by your side that make the journey worthwhile. Their story is a testament to the power of partnership, reminding us that millionaire stories aren't just about the riches, but the bonds that help us conquer life's greatest challenges.